Well, I'm James Olley, joined by Mark, Ogden and Rob Dawson. How are we both?
All good, mate. Yeah, looking forward to another busy week of big Premier League games. Race for fourth now, isn't it? Or is it the race for fifth? What we're calling it?
It is the race for fifth. I've noticed that basically on all the graphics now, the dotted line is underneath the fifth, isn't it? It looks weird, but it is accurate.
I think the issue is whether how many teams can get into Europe. I think we're talking about 9, but I suppose if United or Tottenham win the Europa League, we could be getting out of 10. So for Man United fans, maybe the season isn't dead yet. Maybe there's a Conference League place to be won if you can win your next 4 games, maybe, and get away from the relegation zone.
United are going to finish 17th in top 5 of the Champions League.
Well, maybe that might tempt Marcus Rashford to stay at Manchester United for another season beyond this summer. Let's see. But last Tuesday night's performance for Aston Villa for Rashford against Paris Saint-Germain was a glimpse of the player that we saw a couple of seasons ago that is still in there somewhere. What does the future hold? There was a story in the Daily Star over the weekend that suggested that a swap deal with Ollie Watkins is being lined up at Villa. Rob, you're writing about Marcus Rashford. What can you tell us about this particular link?
Well, I mean, just in terms of in Marcus Rashford in general, I think his career is at a crossroads. And I know we've said that a number of times, throughout his time at Man United, but this really does feel like another big one that is obviously going to be at Villa now until the end of the season. He's done relatively well. He looks happier and more content than he has done at sorts of times at Man United. But then the big time for him really is this summer, and what happens to him. Does he stay at Villa? Does he have to go back to Man United? Is another club going to see what he's done at Villa and come in for him and try and take him there? Really all options are on the table at the moment, and it's incredible, really, for a player like Marcus Rashford to, at 27 years old, with all that potential, all that undoubted ability. That there's a feature going on the ESPN website at some stage this week. He's back at the Etihad Stadium playing City on Tuesday night. The last time he was there, he scored a fantastic goal for Man United in a Manchester derby. It was difficult to see then, that was almost a year ago, that could have been his last ever appearance in a Manchester derby. And really, in the last year, his career at Man United has unravelled to the point, to get us here. And now you're talking about a player, at one time, one of England's best ever prospects, is looking for a new club. And it's incredible, really, to think about what's happened to his career in the last sort of year and a half.
Mark, what do you think his relationship is like with Ruben Amorim? I mean, Amorim obviously was quite publicly critical of him. He was asked a lot about him before he left and then even after he left. Do you think that that relationship is repairable between the manager and Rashford?
I don't think so. From what I've heard, it's not repairable. I think Amorim went in there with a very firm decision that Rashford wasn't his kind of player, both on the pitch and off the pitch. He made references more than once to how he, approached his professionalism off the pitch. So I think that was a bigger issue for Amorim rather than his ability or his talent. It was how Marcus Rashford was preparing for training, how he was preparing for games. How we all know that he went to New York just before Amorim arrived. And I think, although that wasn't against club rules, I think it was the tone of it wasn't great. And I think from day one, Amorim has had doubts about Rashford, even though the first goal of Amorim's reign was scored by Rashford at Ipswich. So, it came from that high point, but I don't think there's a way back. And I don't think from Marcus Rashford's perspective either, he's prepared to work for Ruben Amorim because he'll feel, I imagine, quite slighted by Amorim the way he was treated. I was at Fulham that day when we asked Amorim, has Rashford got a chance? And he said, no, I'd rather play my goalkeeper coach. And the goalkeeper coach is 63. So you can't say things like that and open the door for a player to come back. So I think there's no chance of Marcus Rashford going back to Man United. So Jim Ratcliffe even said a similar thing when he was interviewed recently. So for me, it's a question of get to the end of the season, where does he go? Because I have to say, I was at the Villa games against PSG home and away. And Rashford was very quiet away. He was taken off in the first game in Paris. It wasn't the easiest game for Villa, but he didn't have a great game. Second leg at Villa Park, first half, he was non-existent. His loss of possession gave away the first goal. But second half, for 25 minutes, he was on fire. And that was the Marcus Rashford that we know from his peak days at Man United. And, Rob's reference to the goal he scored at Man City last season, that incredible goal. But that is what Marcus Rashford is all over. He's a moments player rather than a player with any consistency. And I think there's almost like we're all being a bit gaslit here by the Marcus Rashford, the pro Marcus Rashford camp, because let's be honest, he scored 3 goals in 18 games for Aston Villa and 2 against Preston North End. He's not had that great a run. I think he's finished 1 game, or he may not even finish 1 game. So I think we're all getting a bit carried away that Marcus Rashford is suddenly back to the player he was. He's got 3 goals in 18 games. That is nowhere near. If you're Aston Villa, are you going to pay a £40 million fee and potentially £300 a week wages for a guy who scored 3 goals in 18 games? I don't think so.
Well, let's get into that, because the wages is obviously a factor if Villa were to try and pursue this swap deal. But Rob, does it not make a degree of sense if they can make the economics work? Because he has been revived to some extent at Villa Park, and we know that Villa tried to sell Ollie Watkins in January. He's clearly not even really hiding his frustration at the lack of game time he's had of late, and just really how he's been treated in this calendar year. United will need a centre forward this summer. He's 29. He's proven in the Premier League. He can come straight in, and he's not necessarily going to be there 5, 6, 7 years. So if you want to persevere with Højlund, you could try and sell that to him as, look, we're bringing in a guy to maybe help you for a couple of years. But if they want to sell Højlund, then they've got a proven replacement. Does this have legs, this Watkins-Rashford swap?
Yeah, I mean, you can make it make sense, I think, is the kindest way I can put it. And United have looked at Watkins in the past. They looked at him when they were trying to sign Højlund and were put off by his price tag. They thought, I think it was around sort of 60, 70 million that Villa were asking at the time. And United thought that was too much and went in a different direction.
Paid the same fee for Højlund.
It does make sense because he is Premier League proven. I think he could play an effective role in that Amorim system. The only thing I would say from United's point of view is I think, judging by the other targets they're looking at in other areas, they're looking for a younger profile. They're trying to get players maybe a little bit younger than they have done in the past, and develop them themselves, because A, they're cheaper, and B, there is a prospect of, in terms of PSR, that you could always sell them on, later on in their careers. I could understand why there was interest in Watkins. I think it may be driven though by what they need to do with Marcus Rashford, because Rashford, as Mark just referenced there, he's done all right at Villa. He hasn't been fantastic. But the Rashford thing is a major, major problem for Man United in the summer, because if Amorim just says point blank he cannot come back, then they need to get rid of him, and they need to find or facilitate a move somehow. And you've referenced there the wages. The wages are a major, major stumbling block. They were in January. There was no real indication from Rashford and his representatives that he wanted to take a pay cut, which really narrowed his options and meant that United were having to pay part of his wage even to get him to Villa in the first place. I think AC Milan at one point were looking at paying half of his wages. The Rashford said that he wanted the full package, and that kind of killed that deal before it even got started. So it may take something like this to get Rashford off United's books, and maybe United will look at the Watkins thing and say, well, Watkins gives us 3 or 4 years. It's a way to get Rashford to Villa. We take Watkins. He scores goals for 2 or 3 years, and it buys a little bit of time maybe to make a long-term replacement. Maybe Liam Delap goes somewhere else, and then you look at Liam Delap further down the line because they don't quite think he's ready just yet. It may be that because Rashford and his wages are such a big problem for Man United, that we see a kind of one of these strange, because everyone will know, James and Mark, you'll know themselves, these swap deals or these kind of joint deals are really, really hard to negotiate. But maybe that's what it takes to get Rashford off the books if that's what United and Amorim want to do.
But Rob, we're talking here about would United fancy that as a deal and would Villa do it? But Marcus Rashford's key to this, isn't it? And I've been told that Marcus Rashford is basically using Aston Villa as a shop window to get a move to Barcelona. And this came up in January that he wants to go to Barcelona. I don't quite know where he play. You've got Rafinha on one side, you've got Lamine Yamal on the other side, and you got Robert Lewandowski who's getting on a bit in the middle. But we know that Marcus Rashford doesn't like to play through the middle. So how realistic is Barcelona for Marcus Rashford? And I know you know the Rashford camp a little bit. Does he really believe he can go to Barcelona? Does he really want to go to Barcelona?
I think it would be his priority, and I think it was his priority in January. Obviously, that is driven a little bit by Marcus and his representatives. I've got to be honest, I was a little bit surprised when the news came back from Spain that there was legs in that. I thought that Barcelona, would look at that and think, well, we can't afford him anyway. We've got Rafinha on the left. We've got Lewandowski playing up front. Where's he going to play? We can't afford to spend that much on a player who's just not going to play. But the news that came back from Spain was that at one point there was a little bit of interest there. Obviously, it didn't come to anything because he went to Villa. Now, obviously, with Barcelona, you've got the issue of their finances. Everyone will know about their financial problems. They're struggling to register the players they've even got, let alone sign new players. Again, though, it may be, and this hasn't been ruled out by Man United, that they have to agree another loan move for a season. And maybe it takes United to supplement some of his wages to get him to somewhere like Barcelona. You kick the problem down the line for a year, you eat another year into his contract. You get his wages or part of his wages off the book a little bit for the next year, so you can kind of reinvest that money elsewhere. I think it's complicated. I would be surprised if it was the type of thing that happened. The one thing I was told from the lads that cover Barcelona was that it wasn't a Hansi Flick driven deal. It was Laporta, because Laporta still has this thing of signing the world's best players. He wants names and profiles. And, whatever you think about Marcus Rashford, Rashford still has that name and profile in European football. And even United will tell you that he is still their star player in terms of interview requests, shirt sales, interest in players. It's only Rashford. And Rashford even rivaled Ronaldo, unbelievably, when Ronaldo was there. He's that much of a name. And so maybe that drives it for Barcelona, and somehow a deal gets over the line. But I would be very, very surprised if that happened.
James, let's ask you a question just on the profile of Rashford. I'm just wondering, because obviously you cover Arsenal very closely. It reminds a little bit of the Raheem Sterling situation, where you've got players who've got huge reputations. They signed big contracts a couple of years ago when the game was different. And certainly Sterling seems to have, is at a crossroads as well. People like Sterling and Rashford, big players, big names who've got a real track record, but they just can't find clubs. I mean, do you see similarities between the two players?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Raheem Sterling's season has been a complete disaster, really. I mean, the deal came about because Chelsea dropped their demands on deadline day and essentially made the sort of financial aspects of it irresistible to Arsenal. And because, Mikel Arteta obviously would work with Sterling at Manchester City, he felt he could get the best out of him. But, we've seen it time and again that not only is Sterling not made the starting 11, but when they've needed a goal in a game, he's not even brought him on. I mean, look at it yesterday, or the weekend rather, against Ipswich. They won that game 4-0. Clearly, the focus is all now on the Champions League for Arsenal, yet he doesn't get in the starting lineup in a reshuffled team, and then he only comes on when the game's over, and that's in a game that really doesn't particularly matter for them anymore. And that's just been the story of his year. So, obviously Rashford has really kind of got further down the line in terms of his rehabilitation, if you like, because he's got himself back in the England squad. He's got people talking about him again. Raheem Sterling is this summer at a major crossroads in his career, because Chelsea don't want him, Arsenal are not going to sign him, and where does he go? What is the market for Raheem Sterling? So, that might well be a piece you read, Mark, in the next couple of weeks, and maybe we'll talk about it in more detail. But I just wanted to add something on Watkins, just to finish that conversation off, just to provide a bit more context from his point of view. He's an Arsenal fan, and he wanted to go to Arsenal in January, and he saw that as something of a dream move for him when it looked like it might happen. And I do wonder whether, if Arsenal can't pursue their major targets this summer, if they're not able to go after a Sesko or Gyökeres, or these players that we've talked a lot about, whether Watkins becomes a viable option for them because of the players' desire to move and because of the economics of it. Now, my understanding was that Villa came to Arsenal and offered Watkins for 60 million. Arsenal offered 40, and then they didn't. Then they kind of dilly-dallied, waited, didn't pursue the deal with enough vigor, and in the meantime, Duran got sold to Saudi for the bigger deal, and then apparently, according to one source, anyway, Villa upped their price tag to 90 million for Watkins, and Arsenal walked away. Now, he's obviously not worth £90 million, and that was clearly a circumstantial situation. But if he's available again for something like closer to 40 or 50 in the summer, then he becomes a viable option for a couple of clubs, doesn't he? I mean, do we not think there's a market for Watkins at 40, 50 million this summer, given how proven he is in the Premier League?
There really should be. I mean, listen, this is a bit of a kind of bee in my bonnet at the moment about clubs just turning away from players who are older than 25, 26, 27 because they think they've got no value. But I think certainly Ollie Watkins, let's say to Man United, for instance, at 29, he is exactly what they need. He's an experienced player that they need who you can get 10, 15 goals at least a season. If they bring in someone like Liam Delap, it's a perfect blend, isn't it? You need an experienced forward. And Rob was saying earlier on that United are now focusing on the younger players. Well, they've done that with Xerxes in Holland and it's not worked. I understand why they think, well, we can't do the Casemiro Varane style transfers again. But I think Ollie Watkins is different. He's got a great fitness record. He's not as many miles in the clock, shall we say, as some of the players you've signed. So I think from United's perspective, it would be a great deal. But Arsenal as well, I think you could name any of the top six. If Liverpool moved on Darwin Núñez, Ollie Watkins to Liverpool would be a good signing because he's a proven goal scorer. So Villa have got a player on the books who a lot of people would clearly want. But I think as we've said before, there's been a few instances this season after matches where Ollie Watkins has said things pretty critical of Unai Emery, and they kind of in a disguised kind of way, but he's not hidden his dissatisfaction with the way he's playing. He's not really played as a starting role for quite a while. Zorán was starting ahead of him before he left, and now Rashford and Asensio have taken his place. So I think Ollie Watkins would be a great sign for a lot of clubs this summer.
The one thing I just think from an Arsenal point of view, I wonder whether they've had their hands sort of stung a little bit in the sort of opportunistic deals by the Sterling move, because, again, that was one that was presented to them that they went for. Watkins was one that was presented to them that they tried to do, but then weren't sure about it with the valuation. And obviously in that time, the opportunity passed. They're very strategic, Arsenal, with the way that they go about their business. They plan it months in advance. The management team, the executives fly over to LA every November and they plan out the windows. They plan the January and then the next summer window. And they've taken a lot of criticism in the past in fact, they did last summer, for keeping their powder dry when Sesko signed a new deal at Red Bull Leipzig. They decided not to go after another centre forward. And you could argue it's cost them the Premier League this season. So, as much as we're all focusing on the positives about the Champions League, it's easy to forget that conversation has been rumbling on in the background. And I just wonder whether they reach a crossroads, whether they decide they need to be more opportunistic, or actually the Sterling deal has decided to make them sort of double down on that. No, we wait for the right player. And if it means, we go with a hole in the squad for a season or for 6 months, then so be it.
Rob, just finally on Rashford, do you think there's a way back at United? Do you think that, James asked me earlier on about Amorim, do you think there's a possibility they could have a rapprochement, or Jadon Sancho and Ten Hag buried the hatchet a little bit last summer, but it didn't really kind of last? Do you think Rashford could go back to United?
Well, I remember you telling me last summer that there's always a way back. That if Tevez can reconcile with Mancini and City and go back, that there's always a way back for every player. And I was amazed that Jadon Sancho, went back last summer after what had happened with Ten Hag, and it actually weakened Ten Hag's position immeasurably, and it still happened. So I do think there's a way back. I think it's interesting. There's been a couple of, it's referenced in the piece that's going on the site, but there's been a couple of interviews that Amorim has done, broadcast interviews, where he's been quite strong about Rashford, and club communication staff have tried to tone those quotes down, pulled in favours and asked for those quotes to be kind of softened a little bit. Now that can only be happening because they are making sure that there's, bridges aren't as burnt as they already are, and that if there has to be a way back somehow in the summer, that option is still there. Now, I'm not suggesting that Rashford comes back and is the starting centre forward for Man United next year and scores 40 goals. But there is a scenario where this deal is so complicated because of Marcus's wages that he has to come back in the summer just to train, just to keep fit. And that's exactly what happened with Sancho. Now, there was an option. United were saying all last summer that there was an option that Sancho could, if Chelsea hadn't come in, then they would have been stuck with Sancho and he would have had to be a part of the squad. And I think United are kind of preparing for that sort of scenario, that a deal for Marcus doesn't happen straight away in the window. United start pre-season, I think, the middle of July. It's still not happened. Marcus has to come back to United just to train and keep fit. Amorim then says, well, come and train with the group because I don't want you training on your own because that diminishes your value. Come on tour with us. There is a scenario where he does all right on tour. He does the things that Amorim has been asking him to do for the first 2 months of his reign. And then, United struggle to sign the players they want in the summer, and all of a sudden Marcus is back in the fold. United certainly aren't ruling it out. They're not saying it's particularly likely, because obviously their ideal scenario is that Villa say, here's 40 million, we're going to take all his wages, thanks a lot, we'll take him. That's their ideal scenario. But they know that at the moment is very, very difficult to do. And because his future's up in the air, they have to prepare for everything, and that includes him coming back in the summer.